Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We are committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Brian Segre. He holds a doctorate in podiatric medicine. He is a performance coach for the brain, and he guides clients to live with intention and purpose. His modalities include mindfulness, physical activity, healthy eating, and connecting with nature. He's also a mental health advocate. Dr. Segre, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. I'm excited to be here and just really looking forward to discussing and giving something great to the audience.
Look, I'm looking forward to our conversation as well. But first, this reminder to our listeners and viewers, follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Brian, so you're a podiatric doctor. Are you currently practicing, and what is that like for you?
No, so I'm not practicing now. I did for about, gosh, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years. I was a residency director and fellowship director, professor for the last seven or so of those, and really, really enjoyed it. I did mostly trauma and reconstruction, had the privilege to work on a lot of professional athletes and teams, and really, really enjoyed it. The education was just the thing that really touched my heart. The students, the residents, just really giving back to them like people did for us when we were younger. But no, when I lost my dad, I walked away from my career to come back to Texas to help take over the family business, and left my career behind to help mom. So I'm no longer practicing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, did you enjoy being a professor when you were teaching?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
family? Mhm. Okay. What family business were you in, or are you
Yeah.
in?
So my
Mhm.
my family owned my dad, when he got out of high school, started a plumbing business in Texas, and had that company for about 47 years, grew it to one of the largest companies in the state.
Wow.
And then like I said, when he passed away, him and my mom were like, high school sweethearts. They did everything together, founded the business together, grew the business together. And when he passed, she was just devastated. And so
Mhm.
I thought to myself, okay, well, surgery is blood running through pipes and plumbing is fluid running through pipes. So I told myself
Yeah.
I can come back home and help with this. And honestly, it was a very easy decision. My wife supported it. And, we still live just 2 miles away from mom. So it really was a
Uh,
good pivot in my life.
that's fantastic. And now you are a performance coach. How did you make that shift from, medicine, then running a plumbing business, then now a performance coach?
Yeah, I think, when I was in college and after college for a while, my first crack at the real world was I was an endurance athlete for a while. And so I think in my career early on, I kind of always had a coach, but it was a coach for the body, right? Like a traditional coach that we think of. And I never really had anyone that kind of helped walk me through life. We go to medical school, we go to residency, whatever we do in our jobs, people are giving us all this knowledge and they're teaching us how to be good at our work, but they're not teaching us how to fit that into how do you be a human? How do you have a relationship?
Mm.
How do you get married? How do you hold down a house, right? No one really teaches you the mental part of how to do the real world. You just have to kind of figure it out on your own. And
Mhm.
so as I went through my career, I noticed that there were times in my life where I would be working with a mentor or a coach, and it really gave me sort of the opportunity to progress to a level that I wouldn't have been able to get to, I don't think. And I looked back at my life when I was the residency and fellowship director, and I said, you know what? The thing that I help these youngsters out with the most is not, how to solve a problem, not medical knowledge. It's they were asking me questions about their life, like how do I find time to do this? How do you find time to take care of yourself when you work 100 hours a week, right? And so I found myself sort of always coaching, but never getting paid for it. And so then
Mhm.
after we sold the family business, I took 6 months off, and my wife said, "You need to find something to do and get out of the house." And so I finally decided to take a crack at doing what really changed my life, which was coaching people through struggle, and I've been doing it ever since, and I just love it.
Mhm. Well, like we put it, people don't learn how to be human. So did you begin thinking about that while in college or while you were working as a professor and a surgeon?
Yeah, I started thinking about it honestly when I was in college because it was really rigorous to, to try to do academics and then travel for sports. And I was having a difficult time. Not that the academics was easy for me, right? Like navigating in the classroom, I was very fortunate. I mean, I worked hard, but I excelled in the classroom. But what I was struggling with was not just a social life, but life outside of the classroom, right? Like the structure was easy for me, but what do you do? Like there's got to be more to life than just learning and going to class all day, right? And just excelling in a profession. And so I think I started to question really deeply back then, even, what's going on upstairs up here? How do we learn to use this thing? How do we learn to, control our thoughts and our emotions and really develop good communication skills with people. And I just got really interested in that when I was young.
Yeah, that's great. Right. Now you're branding yourself as I like the way it sounds, by the way, the performance coach for the brain. What prompted you to brand yourself that way?
Yeah, I think there's this sort of, I mean, I think it's becoming more, people are more aware of it now than they were years ago, but there's this thought that our brains are this sort of static thing, meaning we can learn information, but we can't change our beliefs, right? Like they're set in stone, or we can't change our thought process or learn to really analyze who we are. And this term neuroplasticity, right? Like the term about being able to change and rewire, if you will, the connections in your brain is a real thing, right? We're discovering now that through certain types of exercises and certain types of mindfulness, you truly can make new connections or rewire areas of your brain and do things differently than you always have, right? And so that's where I sort of got the number to talk about, performance training for your brain.
Mm-hmm. So in your work as a human development, personal development, executive coach, what kinds of things do you look at? I mean, do you look at self-worth, do you look at happiness, or are there some other things in addition to these?
Yeah, so those are really important. I think for me, happiness is one that's really, really crucial because I spent a long time in my life doing what I call chasing happiness because I truly feel that happiness is externally driven. And I feel that true joy comes from inside, right? And so I think that in life, a lot of people, they chase happiness. They think it's the next job promotion, it's the next car, it's the next house, whatever. And they're constantly moving the goalpost. And there was a time in my life when I just had this moment of clarity and I realized I don't need any of these things to be happy. I can do that right here anytime I want. So yeah, I work with people through a lot of different things. That's one of them: self-awareness, self-confidence, right? Courage, overcoming limiting beliefs, all of these types of things. But I think for me, it all starts in that mind connection.
Right. I want to stay here for much a moment. You said that, you could guide someone into be happy right here, right now. Give an example of how you would do that.
Yeah. So, for example, one thing I do with people is an exercise I do with clients all the time early on is I'll just have them get a pen and paper with me while we're like live on a call. And I'll have them make a list of 25 things and I'll have them write down 25 things, that they're really happy about or that they have achieved in their life, 25 goals, things that they really are proud of. And then I'll have them write another list down of 25 things that they're working towards or that they are trying to accomplish, right? And what happens is when they write those things down, it's amazing how there's so many of those things that overlap and they don't even realize it. And so it's about emphasizing to people that you can still want to pursue something, right? We can have this idea of chasing excellence, but there's no reason to not be content and happy with where you are. And so that's a quick exercise people can do. And you'll see that some of those things that you think you want, you already have them, right? And
Right.
so that's a quick way.
It's easy to overlook some of your achievements, right? When you're looking, beyond. So yeah, but look, self-worth, and at least it strikes me to be a huge topic. But first, let me ask you, what sort of people, what are the backgrounds of some of the people who may struggle with self-worth? I mean, are these like people who did not go to college, or could these also be professionals, or what's this population like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will tell you, and this is not me, picking or poking at any sort of group of people. I actually find, and this could just be with the client population that I work with, so much of this stuff is in people that you would not expect. So very high achieving people, it's almost like I use the analogy of like the duck swimming on a pond, right? Where above the water, everything looks really great, but underneath the water, it's this, mile a minute. And so there's so many people that I've worked with that are own multiple companies, work at big, Fortune 500 companies, huge executives, and people would think they have it all figured out. But underneath the surface, it's total mess and chaos. And even a lot of them question their self-worth. Are they contributing to society? Are they just contributing to their own pocketbook? So it's not necessarily the population that you would think.
Right. That's good to know because some people have a misunderstanding that only lower class people, so to speak, have this problem. So would you say that many of us have what's called the imposter syndrome? Is that a part of it?
I really think it is, and it's funny because this term, this idea, right, of this syndrome, if you will, is so old. It's been around for a while, and I think that everyone, to a certain degree, really, really does have that. And I think, honestly, in my opinion, and this again is just opinion from my standpoint of what I read and what I see, I think so much of that comes back to fear, in the sense that, right, we're worried we're not good enough. We haven't achieved what our peers have achieved. We're worried that we're going to slip up, right? We're worried that our hair is not done just the right way. It's all of these things, whether they're physical or whatever, and it creates this sort of bubble around you where you're constantly questioning your self worth, like we talked about, but you're also questioning where you fit into society. And so you feel, even if you are achieving, or even if you're not achieving, you feel like you don't belong where you are sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think we compare ourselves against some other too frequently?
Yes. That, that old saying, they say what comparison is the thief of joy, right? I mean, I know it's a very well-known saying, but I will tell you that it's funny. I made a post on social media, maybe, I don't know, a month ago now, and it's one of my best performing posts to date. And I was talking about comparison. And I really, truly think that most people could change their life, like, very quickly, if they change that one thing, stop comparing themselves to other people. Because it's not that you don't want to evaluate yourself against other people, right? The problem is that we very often are comparing ourselves to people that are at different points where we are, or in totally different arenas. And so when you do that, it brings that imposter syndrome out, and it just gives you a sense of, you feel lost because you can't achieve that, right?
So why do we, give ourselves the short end of the stick more often than to see our good side, our pluses?
It's interesting, right? Like, I find that us as humans, and I do this too, you're right, we very often we'll have more negative self-talk, or we'll be harder on ourselves than we are on other people. And I don't know why that is. I think it's human nature that people tend to be very critical of themselves, but you can get into a really bad trap that way, because it's not that you don't want to be your own critic, but you have to do it in a way that's not tearing down, right? Building up. And so I think that, it's something that a lot of people, myself included, sometimes struggle with, is this constant feeling of comparison. And it doesn't just end with others. We do it to ourselves as well.
Yeah. Do you think it's because we live in a very competitive society? Is that a part of it?
I really think it is. I think, if you look at mental disease, if you look at a lot of, social media, these things now, and then you look back thousands of years ago, before they had all of this technology. I mean, it's amazing to me that, people are seeking, reassurance or reactions or likes or comments from people they don't even know online constantly during the day. They're questioning themselves and judging themselves based on people that they don't know whether they liked something that they wrote. And I think it's a constant in our society today. It's a constant need to be seen, to be accepted, to be liked. And I think that technology, although it's a necessity, I think even 25 years ago, before, 30 years ago, before social media, people weren't constantly worried what other people thought about them. They were just living their lives in the present moment.
Yeah. I like the landscape that you work in as a coach and a mentor. And I just want to throw out a few things more and have you just kind of respond in terms of how you work with people about them. Is it okay with you? Okay,
Sounds good.
here's one, and I found this as well. I'm happy that he works in this domain, limiting beliefs. First, what is it, and how do you work with people around this subject?
Yeah, this is great. So we all have these beliefs in our mind, and most of us, believe it or not, these beliefs are formed by the time you're 7 years old, which is incredible, right? So most of the beliefs that we have, our belief system is something that we had solidified by the time we were 7. So a limiting belief could be anything like, I can't go and get my PhD. I can't open up a bakery. I can't whatever because I'm not smart enough or I'm not good enough, right? And so a limiting belief can be something as simple as that. And one of the easiest ways to work over or around that is when someone says something like that, like if I'm working with them, we'll stop right there and I'll tell them, okay, great, this is perfect. I'll tell them, this is your limiting belief. And they'll say yes. And I say, okay, so what I want you to do is give me 3 pieces of evidence, right, in your world, whether it's a story, something that happened to you, something you've observed that actually proves that limiting belief wrong. Okay. And so very often that person can find 10 pieces of evidence like that proves the belief that they have in their mind to be untrue, but they can't find one piece of evidence to prove that it is true, right? So it's a belief system that they have that's a concrete belief, but when they stop and use their conscious mind to analyze it, they'll have this light bulb moment go off and say, oh my gosh, I don't know why I feel that way. And then right then and there, they'll start to realize that some of these beliefs that they have are just they're untrue.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, this is very, very important. You said by the time a child is 7 years old, that they've formed many of their limiting beliefs. Where are these beliefs coming from?
It's a great question. So most of the belief systems that we get, and I'm not talking about these subjects to be controversial, but they might be from the church, right? They're the old right and wrongs. They might be from your parents. They might be from parents' friends. They might be from, just standard moral right versus wrong type things. They could be things that are constantly shown maybe on TV that you're watching. But most of those beliefs come from societal standards, whether it's through the church, through the home, through politics, through your environment. They're experiences that you're having or stories that you're being told over and over again, and that forms this belief system in your mind.
Yeah. So what can families do? Since we know this is happening, what can young families, young couples do to better prepare their kids, for the world in a sense?
Right. I think one of the most important things, honestly, that we can do is to teach our children, but also us, is to keep, and I know it sounds very simple, but to be very open-minded about things, right? Like, I think, especially nowadays with society trying to divide us, right? Or the media constantly trying to pit one versus another. I think people very often in these modern times, they pick sides, right? They choose a very hard line. But what's interesting is people like you and I, someone I meet randomly on the street, if we sit and have a cup of coffee and we talk for 30, 45 minutes, we realize how similar we actually are. And we're not actually all that different. And so one of the most important things to help someone who's young and developing, being able to keep those beliefs really fluid, is to be open and not to have a really regimented, black and white, red and green, it's this way or that way. There's always, in between. And so
Yeah.
it's teaching both sides that makes it so important.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this specific question about limiting beliefs. Can a kid pick up the belief, I'm afraid of the dark, before he or she is 7 years old, and have that travel with them into later years?
I'm sure. I actually had that one. I don't know specifically, but I did have a client that I worked with who had this belief that dogs were like evil, that they were scared of dogs, right? And they were trying to get married, and their fiance wanted to have dogs in the house, and they were scared of dogs. And this gentleman that I worked with was just terrified of dogs, and he had had this belief his whole life, but he never had a negative experience with a dog, never had been bit by a dog, never had anything. And so it was just, and we had to really dig in and find out where this came from. And it turned out it was from something that his family had experienced, and it was constantly preached to him as he was growing up. And so he developed this belief that dogs were terrible. And now he's a dog
Mhm.
lover. So
Isn't that something? Right. So people can change. So what about
yes.
this one? Before we leave this notion of limited beliefs, and then what kids can pick up? What about the idea money is the root of all evil? Is that something that
Right.
could become rooted before you're 7 years old?
I think it can. And I think the interesting thing with money is, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule like we were just talking,
Mhm.
but what I've seen with money, in my life is money is not for me, I don't believe the root of all evil. What I see with money is money tends to exaggerate the characteristics that a person already has. So if a
Mhm.
person is a giver, if a person is a server, if a person is kind hearted and gracious, they're going to probably use that money for good, right? If that's their belief system. If
Right.
someone is cutthroat and they're looking to advance for their own personal gain and they're looking to just build their coffers full of money, that person is probably going to use money for personal gain. And
Right.
so, what I've seen throughout my life is most people, money doesn't necessarily change them, it just amplifies those underlying characteristics.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. So I want to look at just a few more things from the landscape that you work in your practice. And I'm going to throw just two more out and we'll move on. The other one is the fear of failure. Does that come up in your work and do you blog about that? And what can you
Yes.
share about that subject?
Yeah, that I think is probably like a core principle of what I see and what I talk about. And again, I think that fear, that four-letter word I tell people, is probably the root of almost all conditions that I work with. And that honestly, a lot of physicians or therapists or people work with. And that fear of failure is so incredibly powerful. And it can either be something that just stops you dead in your tracks, or it can be
Mhm.
something that if you have the right mindset and you have the right tools, it can be something that motivates you, right? Because there's been a lot of famous people throughout history who in one way or another have said that, courage is just acting despite fear, right? Or you know what I mean? Or so there
Mhm.
so I think when it comes to fear, being fearless is not ideal, because if you're fearless,
Right.
you're going to make unrational decisions. I really think that we have to have a little baseline of fear because that motivates us to take action. The problem is that if you focus too much on failure and not thinking about when you fail as a learning opportunity, that's when I really shifted, was when I realized, okay, if I
Mhm.
fail, right, I'm not the first person to fail doing this. And if I fail, big deal. Now I can actually learn something, because if you're always winning, if every time you do something you win, that's going to be a bad scenario at one point,
Mhm.
because at one point you're going to fail and you're going to have no idea how to get back from that, right? And so
Mhm.
I think that fear of failure is a real thing, but what we have to do is see it as an opportunity and not as an obstacle.
Yeah. So what I hear you say is that there's some fears that are reasonable. If you walk and you see a big boa constrictor in the road, but then yeah, but I think I'm not hearing you say that some fears are irrational. Can you expound a little bit more for me?
Yeah, so I think that some fear is not rooted really in any sort of like um, any sort of real rationalization. So here's a great example. A lot of people will have this victim type mentality. And again, this is not to be mean to anybody, but
Mhm.
we've all experienced this in our lives. Maybe it was us, maybe it was a friend or a family member, a colleague, where they think the world is out to get them, right? My boss is trying to get me fired. I got every red light on the way to work. Everything's going wrong for me. My shoelace is untied and I tripped, right? So it's like, there are some people who can have a fear that the world is conspiring against them or the world is out to get them. But when you take a step back, the world is actually working for you, not against you, right? But if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
sit there and you have a fear that everyone is conspiring against you, then it's very irrational. And what happens is those things that you think are happening, they start to happen because they start to
Mhm.
find you, because you pull that negativity towards you. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that victim sort of, that everything is conspiring against you, is a fear that is really irrational.
It's amazing how that happens. I bought a new car recently, this car, and I tell you, I didn't see this car before I got it. Now that I have this car, I'm seeing my car all over the place. Can you, is this relevant to what you're saying? There's
Yeah, so
something can
this
show
is
up in your consciousness and then you can
correct.
see it everywhere.
Absolutely. So that is we actually use that example, that very example. And that happened to me too when I got a new car. And you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I had the one unique color. Now I see them everywhere. And it's
Yeah.
so common that when you start to focus on the conscious, right, and the subconscious, and they kind of start to align, and you start to realize that your mind is a lot more powerful than you think, right? And so these things
Mhm.
that you're thinking, if you know, it's like Henry Ford said, right? If you think you can, you can, and if you think you can't, you probably can't, right? So it's like
What a true
you,
statement.
but it's so true, and it goes
Yeah.
back to the car, it goes back to everything in life. I mean, that negative self-talk, and it sounds so silly when you tell someone this, but
Mhm.
when you've had this realization in your life, because I was there before, Stephen, when I was practicing, where I had some mental burnout and I was struggling with
Mhm.
some stuff, and I would just get myself and I would ruminate, and what I would do is I would create negativity in my life and bad situations because I kept thinking they were going to happen and then they would, right?
Mhm.
Um, and when I stopped doing that, lo and behold, I realized that I was doing that to myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like what you're saying. And all of this involves, of course, mental hygiene. But Brian, I want to be more laser into, I want to call it mental hygiene now, because neither one of us is a psychiatrist or psychologist. And I know that you are a mental health advocate because I've read about you. If my first question then is, why do you have passion around this area?
Yeah. So when I was 12 years old, we had a ranch. You know, I grew up on a ranch, and we were going to go up to the ranch for the weekend and spend some time up there. We went up there all the time. And a really close friend of mine was 13 years old, and we were going over to his house to pick him up. He had not done good on his grades, and we both were in martial arts at the time. And so his mom had pulled him out of karate because it was extracurricular, and basically had said, you know, we're not going to focus on this right now until you get your grades up. And he was really kind of, you know, upset by that. This was something that was really important to him. And I remember going over to the house to pick him up, and I knocked on the door, and you know, my dad and my brother and my mom were in the truck. We were all loaded and packed up, and I was going to just run in and go grab him and get him. And she was calling his name, and he wasn't coming. She goes, "Why don't you go upstairs and go get him?" So I run upstairs to go get him, and he had hung himself over his door
Oh,
with his karate belt, right? And I was the first person to walk in on this. And so, you know, for me, at that young age, it was really traumatizing to see that. And then in the medical field, as you know, suicide is at an unacceptable all-time high in society in general, but in the medical profession, there is a huge rate of suicide right now. And so I saw colleagues and friends literally getting killed off when I was practicing at their own hand, literally. And with that, and with what I went through when I was, you know, a young teenager, it's been something that has just been really near and dear to me for a long time.
mhm. Yeah. And you really talk about this. And so before we go deep, and I have some other things to ask you about this. Some people see the subject as one to avoid, you know, including some professionals. But you, a well-trained doctor, this is something that you readily talk about. So my question is, how, did you ever have stigma around it? Like, this is something I don't want to deal with, you know, and be silent about it. Did you ever feel that way? Holding
You
back
know,
and hiding?
I never did, but I will tell you, at least in the professions that I was in, you know, several of them, it's getting better now, thankfully, right? Where it's more accepted to share and to talk about and to help and support. Because honestly, it could be one conversation that you have with someone that pushes them over the edge or that saves them, right? It could be one conversation with someone who's willing to share, not someone who's willing to share that's going through it right then, but maybe someone who's already been through it that's willing to share, you know? And so it is still very stigmatized for sure in the profession, but I do think that um, sharing openly about, you know, some of the things that people have wanted to hide in the dark for so long is a powerful thing. And people that are willing to be vulnerable and share those things truly are saving other people's lives. And so I don't think
Yeah.
it's easy for a lot of people to share, but for the
Mhm.
ones that are willing to share, I'm so thankful that they're willing to.
Yeah. And in your blogs, and I've seen you write about thinking and thoughts and trying to let people understand the mechanism of thought and thinking. Can you tell us about what you do with those topics?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, it goes back to, they say, and this is, just something that I've read several times, but they say that the average person makes anywhere between 25 to 35,000 decisions every day, right? That's like incredible amount of decisions that we're making. But if you think about it, when you get up in the morning and you make a cup of coffee, or you go and you brush your teeth, or whatever it is that you're doing, most of the time you're not actually thinking about what you're doing. You're just doing it, right? It's a ritual, it's a habit, it's a routine. And so teaching someone to be more mindful or to be more present in the moment can literally be just telling them to slow down. And when they do something, to actually think about what they're doing, right? Don't just do it as if it's automatic. Just like when we speak, a lot of times when we're speaking, like when you and I are having a conversation, the person who's listening is thinking about what they're going to say before the other person's actually done talking. I do this all the time, right? But if you actually actively listen and you stop your mind from trying to think about what to say next, and you just let your mind absorb what they're saying, then you have much better control over how you speak. You develop a much deeper connection. And so I think with our thoughts, they're on autopilot for most people, right? I mean, they're thinking about the next thing before they finish the current thing. And so for me, it's just getting people to slow down, to limit the distractions, right? We have all day long our phones, notifications, emails, text messages. We're constantly bombarded with decisions that we have to make. And so I think learning to turn some of those off, learning to limit the ones that are not essential, be present in the moment, and just consciously be aware of what you're thinking is very powerful.
Do you think human beings can talk themselves into being depressed?
Yes, very much so. I think the easiest way to get depressed, not that you want to do this, but the easiest way to get depressed in life is to spend time in the past. If you spend all of your time, right? Because they say that human beings, they can either be in the present, the past, or the future, right? And they say that the majority of the population spends their time in the past and in the future. Very few people spend their time in the present. And so what they say is the more, and I'm not telling you not to reflect on your past and use that as a guide, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who constantly ruminate and think about things that have already happened that they can't change, and they just dwell on those things. That is a very easy way to make yourself depressed. A very easy way to make yourself anxious, which is the other end of the spectrum, is to constantly think about things in the future that you have no control over how they're going to happen or what they're going to, oh my gosh, I got a speeding ticket and I have to go to court and I know I'm going to get the worst thing possible ever, right? And then you go to court and he slaps you on the wrist and you pay $50 and you're on your way. But you caused yourself anxiety for 6 months where you weren't sleeping, you were losing weight, you were stressed out, right? And the same thing happens on both ends of those spectrum, which is why it's so important to just be here and now.
Right. I can imagine, Brian, on that point, that some seniors may be thinking, my money's going to run out when I'm 85 years of age. What am I going to do? And
right.
They're 70 years of age,
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And they could be having the best 15 years of their life, right? Or who knows what could happen. But yeah, you will cause yourself a lot of anxiety, and most anxiety and depression, believe it or not, is actually not chemical in nature. It's not a genetic underlying condition. Most anxiety and depression is actually caused by yourself, right? And the environment. It's not actually caused by genetics. It's you putting it onto yourself.
That's interesting, especially coming from a medically trained doctor. But that's I'd have to bring you back. We'll probe that more deeply at another time. But look here. Can a person talk themselves into being happy?
Yes. So I think that you hear a lot of people talk about, like positive affirmations and positive self-talk, which I think is a very good way to kickstart that process and, kind of move in the direction of talking yourself into being happy. But I really think that one of the best ways to do that, one of the best ways to truly be happy, like right now, is to practice gratitude or do something for someone else, right? Because we all know that one of the best feelings that you ever get is when you do something for someone and you see that reaction on their face because you went out of their way, or you told them to roll the window down and their gas cap was open, or you told them that they had parsley stuck in their teeth, right? It could be something really small. Or it could be maybe you and I haven't talked in a while, and I send you a little text message in the morning and just say, "Hey, Stephen, I'm thinking about you. I hope you have a great day today," and just, really, really miss talking with you. And it can just be small things like that every day. I try to start my day every day in the morning by sending a text message or a voice memo to someone that I haven't talked to in a while, just telling them that I'm thinking about them. And that puts me in a mood in the morning that it's really hard to have a bad day when you start your day off doing something like that for someone else. And so I tell anybody that's struggling with not feeling like they're happy where they are right now to start doing things for other people, and very quickly you will be happy. And it doesn't have to be anything major. It can be really small things.
Yeah, that's powerful. In the field of positive psychology, they talk about RACs, random acts of kindness, producing, a higher feeling for a person. Yeah.
Yes, it's true. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I can't tell you enough how powerful that really is. I mean, we all know, we've all been going into the convenience store or the grocery store, and you just get caught off guard because someone holds that door for you for just a little longer than they probably had to, but they do it anyways. And just that one thing can put you in a better mood. And if you imagine, if you do that a couple times a day, right, you stack those on top of each other, it's really hard to have a bad day. And it's easy, right? Like if all of us did that, which I know it's not going to happen, but the more of us that do that, the better off it can be. And so I that's one thing I practice with all my clients, is I try to get them to, in the morning time, to start their day and to end their day with some kind of gratitude. I mean, it's a game changer for sure.
That's I hear you. Now you blog about, and I love this subject because it touches on the neurosciences. I've seen some of your blogs about reshaping your brain. Is that a real thing? Can you actually reshape the brain?
Yeah, so you really can. So they've done studies, gross anatomic studies, and then they've done studies with, medical imaging, advanced medical imaging, and they've actually been able to look at people who have had maybe one thought or one belief before, and then have worked with specialists to sort of change that belief or change that thought. And what they've actually seen is those areas of the brain that were lighting up or that were responsive before are now not lighting up, or show very little activity. And that new pathway that they created is now firing much more and showing much more activity. And they've seen this with Alzheimer's and dementia and mental disease. And so there are PTSD. And so there are ways to actually rewire or reshape or change the actual functioning of the brain through mindfulness, through discussion, through therapy, through all different sorts of techniques. It's real. I mean, I think for a long time we thought that this was sort of like voodoo, right? That it wasn't a real thing, but it's the real thing. I mean, it's incredible.
That's encouraging, because you would think that you're stuck, but you're saying is that you're not. Even your brain can change.
Correct. Yep. We can actually continue to form different, I tell people the brain is really like a muscle. And so I think we think of the physical body like that, but not the brain. But you really can continue to strengthen the connections in between the nerves in your brain, the neurons, these synaptic connections. You can actually continue to strengthen those and focus on some versus other ones long after you thought that area was already developed.
Some of the people who are watching this discussion or listening to it on one of the podcast platforms would say, yes, Dr. Segre, but stuff happens. But then I would offer them, so if they were telling me that, I would send them one of your blogs about cultivating resilience. Tell us about resilience and how that shows up in your work.
Yeah, I think resilience is one of those things where we all know what the term is, but I really love, there's an author, James Clear. He wrote a lot of books, but he also wrote Atomic Habits, which a lot of people know that book. And he has this great saying that he talks about in there, where he says that in life, we fall to the level of our habits and systems and routines, right? And so what I tell people is, when I think of resilience, Steve, this is what I think of. Maybe it's a time in your life where you're really having to go hard. You're really having to grind. Your kids are home sick from school. You're a caregiver for your sick, uncle who's got cancer. I don't know what it is. You're still having to work. The dog's sick, whatever. It's a time, we all have these times where we're just having to go really, really hard, right? And resilience is the ability to continue to persevere or move forward through those trying times. And I think that the way you do that is not just by having like a powerful mindset and building yourself up or drinking a bunch of coffee. The way that you do it is you have created habits in your life, systems in your life, routines in your life that you can fall back on, right? Because if you just get up every day and you willy-nilly and you don't really have systems in place, then when things go wrong, they come crumbling down, right? But if you have systems in place like the airline industry does, right? Like the medical industry does, if you have systems in place, then when something goes awry, that system will save you from a catastrophe. And so I think us as humans, to be resilient, it's not to just be strong in your own mind and strong-willed. It's to have habitually and with routine built habits into your life that can be your life raft when life gets tough. And those are things that I try to help people do, is to put systems in place that you can fall back on when you have a difficulty.
Yeah. So we would just say that for a human being, resilience is innate and it's something that we may need to fan the flame, but it's not like we got to manufacture it because it's nowhere to be found in us.
Correct. Yeah. I think I think that it's innate, right? I think as humans, we're resilient creatures. But I think that if you rely on resilience and you fight or you go through life right on that razor edge all the time, then you're risking burnout. And so I think that it's something that is innate, but I think that it's that system or routine that holds it up and keeps it from collapsing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in looking at your work, I was touched by your emphasis on the ability of a person to change the narrative, especially the limiting narrative in their lives. And then one thing you say in that, and if I have it wrong, tell me, correct me, but one thing I see you blog about is that fitness and nutrition can help a person change their narrative. Put this together for me.
Yeah, this is great. So I tell people all the time that, I think for far too long, we thought that the physical body and the mental, were separate, that they weren't connected. But I can tell you, as an athlete and someone who continues to lift weights and exercise and take care of myself, that when you learn to do something or you train yourself to do something that is physically hard to do, meaning whether it's physical labor, whether it's digging ditches, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's running sprints, when you put your body through physical demanding work, I can guarantee you that will strengthen you mentally. There is no doubt about that strengthens you mentally, right? Like the ability to pick up a heavy weight over and over again, the ability to run outside in the heat over and over again when your body is wanting to give out, that mental perseverance, that mental fortitude that it takes to get through that is definitely trained through physical work. And then on top of that, I tell people that I think the best two performance enhancing drugs on the face of the earth are the kitchen and the bedroom. I mean, there are study after study after study that talks about how sleep, quality, deep sleep, is one of the best things you can do to be happy, to be productive, to have a good day, right? To accomplish things. And I know, even through own personal experience, that if you have a couple nights in a row where you don't sleep well, good luck trying to get anything done during the daytime, right? And then and then it carries into the kitchen too. I mean, look, I'm from Texas. I love chicken fried steak and bacon cheeseburgers just as much as the next guy, but I'm over 40 now, and I can tell very easily when I'm eating right. And no one's perfect, but I can tell when I'm staying hydrated, when I'm eating right. I think more clear, right? I'm sharper. I think more creatively. I get things done quicker. So I have no doubt that nutrition and that sleep and physical fitness are definitely tied to mental health, because there are a lot of people that anecdotally will tell you, and then there's a lot of studies that have been done where someone has anxiety or depression and they put them on an exercise regimen. They don't give them any medication, right? These are randomized double-blinded studies, and they give them exercise as their form of treatment, and their condition improves from doing exercise alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're onto something here. I mean, sleep deprivation can be dangerous. If you don't sleep, you get behind the wheels. You just, at least I don't perform as well,
No.
but I know them. Yeah. And the other thing though, because someone's going to ask, okay, well, I know that I'm not sleeping well. What can I do about it? But I think you've just pointed at least one thing that a person can do, maybe more intense physical activity, during the day, and see if that helps. What would
That
you say?
is one of the, it's so true. I mean, I will tell you, growing up on the ranch, when I did a lot of physical labor, I never slept so good, right? Getting those 10,000, 8,000 steps in, folding the laundry, maybe wash a few extra dishes by hand. Physical work will definitely make you sleep better. The other thing that will make you sleep incredibly better, and this is something I started doing maybe a year ago, is all of us, we set an alarm clock to wake up in the morning, right? It's time to get up, time to start the day. What I started doing now is 90 minutes before I want to go to bed at night. So if I want to go to bed at 9:30, at 8 o'clock, I set a reminder on my phone that goes off. And at 8 o'clock, I take my watch, my phone, and my laptop, and I put them in another room. And I don't look at anything technological, any digital media for 90 minutes before I go to bed. You will sleep like a baby, because most of us are on our phones scrolling on social media right up until we go lay down in bed, and then you wonder why you can't sleep at night.
Right, understood. But what would you say to the person, bro, who says, I can't exercise, I have a physical disability of some sort? How would you coach them if someone says, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do?
Yeah, so it depends. So for most people, and this is talked about a lot, the best exercise that someone can do now, and there's very few people that can't do this, is walk. If you walk for 20 minutes a day, most people, it's very affordable. They've already got shoes. It's very easy access because most of us can find a place to walk. Walking is probably the best physical activity for people to build as a habit. And the great thing about walking is you can use it for so many different things. So like, let's say you wanted to take a break during the daytime and you needed to make a phone call to the wife. Take your phone, go outside in nature, go for a 20-minute walk in the sunlight and call your wife while you're walking. Or leave your phone behind and go for a 20-minute walk and see the great ideas that come into your head when you're walking, right? So walking is one of the best things I tell people to do because it's low impact and it's easy access.
Yeah, love it. And mindfulness and mindset is also big in your blogs, your many blogs. And for those of you listening, find him on LinkedIn and other platforms because Dr. Segre has a bunch of blogs out there. What do you share about mindfulness and mindset in some of your blogs?
Yeah, so that's another thing that I think is really important too is, there's a lot of people out there that talk about meditation, deep breathing, all of these different things that you can do for mindfulness. Really, what I've found is some of the best, and I don't want to say quickest, but some of the most impactful or powerful time that you can have for mindfulness is to spend time in solitude, right? And so when I say that, people go, oh my God, I don't want to be lonely. I tell them, no, we're not talking about being lonely and isolating yourselves. I tell people I do this every day for 20 minutes. I turn off everything that's digital, right? And I just sit there by myself, alone, in the quiet, with my thoughts, right? That's another way you can learn to control your thoughts. And you sit there in solitude. And I will tell you, if you can learn to do this where you have no distractions and you're just sitting there, you don't have to meditate. You don't have to do deep breathing exercises. Just find somewhere quiet, right? Or go outside and walk where all you're hearing is the sounds of the outdoors, right? You're not hearing the sounds of technology. And just be with your thoughts. That is one of the best places you can go for mindfulness, is to go inside yourself in a quiet environment. And you can do that, and you can do that right now. There's no barrier to entry for that. You can do that today.
Yeah, I love it for sure. Yeah. Now, your brand promise, I'm referring to it as your brand promise, is that you coach people how to live with intention and purpose. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain it is, in order for people to really be fulfilled, right? Because you can be successful and not be fulfilled, and still you failed in life. So I think that you have to have success and fulfillment, in my opinion, to really be content and be happy. And one of the best ways to do that is to be really intentional and purposeful with everything that you do, right? Because everything that we do has an outcome. And so I tell people, right, I love the Stoic philosophy. And I tell people that everything that you do in life, if you couldn't imagine doing that 1,000 times over, if you were reborn 1,000 times, right, and you wouldn't do that one thing again, then don't send that mean text message to the person because you want to have the last word, right? Don't say that snippy thing to someone because you want to have the last word, right? Remember that everything that you do has an outcome. And if it's something that you wouldn't do again, then really sit with it for a minute before you do it. And one of the best ways to really live with intention and purpose goes back to helping people to be in the present moment, right? Because if you're living in the past or you're living in the future, it's really hard to be intentional or purposeful because you can't change those things, right? So teaching someone to come back to reality and back to the moment in time is a really, really good way to get them started down that path.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, we're at the end of our conversation, but let me have one more to ask you. Is there anything else you want to share with us that we have not talked about already today?
I mean, I think you did a wonderful job of really addressing, I appreciate it, by the way. I think you did a wonderful job of addressing multiple topics that I think are relevant to a lot of people. And I just want to encourage people that, you're not defined by the things that you've done in the past. You're not defined by your failures or the things that maybe in your life that didn't go right, because we all have those things, but they don't really define who we are. And I always love to remind people whenever I sign off that most people will tell you at the very end of their life, when you ask them what their regrets are, most people do not regret things that they did. They regret the things that they didn't do, and particularly the things they didn't do with family and friends. And so when you go through life and you're trying to be more present and you're trying to be more intentional and you're trying to be happy, just remember that it's the things that you don't do, and it's the time that you don't spend with loved ones, with close friends. Those are the things that you're going to really wish that you did. So, before you put on another night full of Netflix binging, maybe pick up the phone and call grandma, or pick up the phone and call the friends you haven't talked to in a while, because those are the things that you're going to wish you would have done.
That's awesome. Thank you for coaching us. Well, thank you. It's certainly my pleasure being with you today. You were a great guest, and gotta bring you back. Talk about some of the subjects that you work on. Okay. You've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Dr. Brian Segre. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Until next time, good day